You know those Saturdays that feel like a Norman Rockwell painting, all sunshine and bird song and the smell of freshly cut grass? Yeah, this wasn't one of them. This was shaping up to be more like a Hieronymus Bosch, if Bosch had a peculiar fascination with petty tyrants in floral dresses and an unhealthy obsession with homeowners association bylaws. And I, apparently, was about to become one of the star demons in his masterpiece of suburban misery, armed with nothing but a bad idea and a decommissioned vet ambulance that smelled faintly of regret and old hay. It had started, as most catastrophes do, with a deceptively peaceful morning. The sun was doing its optimistic early summer thing, casting those long, lazy shadows across our lawn. A lawn which, I'd like to point out, was mowed to a regulation 2.5 inches. Thank you very much. I was halfway through a cup of coffee that was rapidly losing its will to live, contemplating the existential dread of my overgrown rosemary bush, when my phone buzzed. It was my girlfriend, Sarah. Her voice was tight, stretched thin like old elastic. "Mike," she said, and the background noise was a chaotic symphony of yips, meows, and one distinctly human sound of someone trying to reason with a brick wall. "You are not going to believe this." "Oh, I think I might, honey. When it involves our neighborhood, Whispering Pines, a name so ironic it circled back around to being almost accurate, given how much whispering went on about people, I'd believe just about anything." "Let me guess," I said, already picturing the culprit. "Brenda's finally declared war on Mr. Henderson's wind chimes again." "Worse, Mike. Much worse. She's got the positive outcomes van blocked in. Maria's driving. We were just doing a pickup from the Hendersons. You know, that litter of kittens they found under their porch? Positive Outcomes is the local animal rescue where Sarah volunteers every spare second she has. She's the patron saint of lost causes and furry friends. Me? I'm more of the chief financial officer of kibble purchases and official head-scratcher when required. "Blocked in how?" I asked, a familiar sense of dread settling in my stomach like cold pizza. "With her car, Mike. Her beige station wagon of doom. She's standing in front of the van, arms crossed, wielding her clipboard. She's spouting something about unauthorized commercial vehicle presence during non-designated hours and, get this, potential biohazard containment protocols not being visibly displayed." I choked on my coffee. "Biohazard? They're kittens, Sarah, not a mobile plague unit. What's Maria saying?" I could hear Maria's voice in the background, strained but polite. "Ma'am, these are rescue animals. They need to get to the shelter. We have all the necessary paperwork. We're a registered non-profit." Then another voice cut through, sharp, and carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who's memorized every single bylaw and isn't afraid to use them. Brenda. "Paperwork, my dear woman, does not supersede subsection 9, Article 4, concerning the permissible tonnage of non-residential vehicles on Whispering Pines asphalt. And I see no evidence of an HOA-approved biohazard dispatch manifest." "Tonnage?" I whispered into the phone. "Is she weighing the van with her eyes? Does she have a little pocket scale for puppies now?" "I don't know, Mike, but the animals are getting stressed. It's getting warm, and Brenda's talking about issuing fines for excessive vehicle idling and failure to present a pre-approved itinerary. You've got to do something." I looked out my window. Sure enough, down the street, there it was. The Positive Outcomes van, a cheerful blue beacon of hope, was indeed trapped. Brenda, a small, wiry woman in a violently floral sundress, was planted in front of it like a garden gnome carved from pure spite. Her ancient beige station wagon was parked with strategic genius, effectively corking the van in the Hendersons' driveway. She'd created a Brenda buffer zone, a perimeter of petty power. My mind raced. Calling the cops? In this town for an HOA dispute? They'd probably arrive sometime next Tuesday, issue a stern warning to everyone involved to play nice, and then leave Brenda to her clipboard-wielding reign. Brenda thrived on bureaucratic stalemates. The animals, though. Sarah. The rising panic in Maria's voice. Okay, think, I muttered, pacing my kitchen. What would a rational person do? Probably try to reason with Brenda. Offer her a cup of tea and a detailed explanation of why her interpretation of tonnage is, perhaps, slightly unhinged. I snorted. Yeah, right. Brenda's not rational. So, fighting fire with fire? No. Fighting Brenda with something even more bewildering? Now we're talking. And then it hit me. The solution, or perhaps the catalyst for an even greater suburban meltdown, was parked right in my driveway, much to Brenda's simmering disapproval. Uncle Leo's art bulence. My Uncle Leo is eccentric. A retired large animal vet, he'd bought a decommissioned animal ambulance at a county auction a few months back. His grand plan was to turn it into a mobile art installation / interpretive dance space. So far, it had mostly served as a 5-star hotel for local pigeons and a repository for his collection of antique horseshoes. I was storing it for him. Brenda had already logged an inquiry with the HOA board about whether it violated the recreational vehicle storage clause, even though the only recreation happening in it involved said pigeons and their, artistic droppings. The keys. They were on the hook by the door, next to the dog leash and a reminder to buy more coffee. The art bulence. It had mostly working flashing yellow lights, a siren that sounded like a constipated moose, and the faint, lingering aroma of hay, antiseptic, and shattered dreams. It was perfect. Brenda wanted official. I'd give her official. Ish. Sarah? I said into the phone. A grin spreading across my face that was probably equal parts genius and madness. Just hold tight. I've got an idea. It's probably a terrible idea. But it's an idea, and it's got wheels. Mike, what are you? Gotta go. Operation Distract and Confuse is a go. The art bulence rumbled to life with the sound of 1,000 protesting squirrels having a garage sale. It wasn't exactly a stealth vehicle. Driving it down our meticulously manicured street, I felt like I was piloting a parade float for a forgotten, slightly sad circus. Curtains twitched. Mr. Henderson, who was probably wondering what new hell was being unleashed upon his Saturday, peered out from behind his controversial wind chimes, which actually paused their infernal clanging for a moment, as if in shock. This was it. Showtime. I pulled up right behind the trapped rescue van, angling the art bulence just so. Not blocking Brenda, not yet. Just making a statement. A very large, slightly rusty, pigeon poop-accented statement. I flicked on the faded yellow flashing lights on top. One of them sputtered gamely for a second, then gave up the ghost with a pathetic fizzle. Close enough. The other one pulsed with a weak, asthmatic glow. Brenda, who had been mid-tirade, clipboard raised like a scepter, pointing at one of the rescue van's tires as if it had personally insulted her lineage, spun around. Her eyes, already narrowed in suspicion at the world in general, locked onto the art bulence. If looks could issue HOA violations, I'd have been bankrupted on the spot. "Michael!" she squawked, her voice climbing an octave usually reserved for discovering a dandelion on her prize-winning petunia bed. What in the Sam Hill is the meaning of this contraption? This is not a designated emergency vehicle zone. And that light, she jabbed a finger at my one feebly flashing beacon, is clearly malfunctioning, a violation of subsection 12, paragraph C, regarding vehicular illumination standards. I hopped out, trying to project an air of calm authority. I'd found an old, slightly too large white coat in the back of the art bulence, probably one of Uncle Leo's. It had a suspicious stain on the pocket that might have been molasses, or something far more sinister. I put it on. It probably made me look less like a medical professional and more like a very confused sandwich artist, but it was part of the ensemble. "Brenda, good morning," I chirped, walking towards the unfolding drama. "Official veterinary business, urgent call. We got a code 3, fluffy butt. Yes, a code 3 fluffy butt. Potential acute dehydration and severe boredom reported in the positive outcomes vehicle. We need to assess the situation immediately." Sarah, who was standing beside Maria trying to soothe a golden retriever puppy attempting to gum Brenda's sensible orthopedic shoe, stared at me. Her expression was a beautiful, terrifying blend of horror, disbelief, and reluctant admiration. Maria just looked like she'd seen a unicorn, a very dusty, slightly dented unicorn. The puppy, sensing a shift in the dynamic, let out a happy bark. Brenda's mouth opened and closed a few times, like a goldfish trying to understand advanced calculus. "Veterinary business?" she finally managed, her voice trembling with indignation. This jalopy isn't registered with the HOA as an approved service provider. I have a list. You're not on the list. And fluffy butt is not a recognized medical term in any veterinary journal I am aware of, and believe me, I subscribe to Modern Petunia Aficionado Quarterly, which occasionally has crossover articles. "It's a new classification, Brenda," I said solemnly, trying to keep a straight face. "Very serious, highly contagious. Boredom, that is. Now, if you'll just allow us to transfer the patients to a more medically appropriate and significantly less beige transport environment." I gestured vaguely with a flourish towards the artbulance, which chose that exact moment to let out a low, mournful groan from somewhere deep within its ancient engine. Maria, bless her quick-thinking soul, caught on immediately. A tiny glimmer of hope sparked in her tired eyes. "Yes," she exclaimed, a little too loudly. The animals are becoming extremely distressed by this unwarranted delay. It's a critical welfare issue. The kittens are refusing their gluten-free kibble. One of the animals in the van, a Siamese cat with an attitude problem and a voice like a tiny, angry chainsaw, let out a prolonged, ear-splitting yowl that sounded suspiciously like, "Brenda is a monumental pain in the posterior." I nodded gravely. "See? Acute vocal distress. Highly symptomatic of advanced fluffy butt syndrome. We need to act fast." Brenda sputtered, her face turning a fascinating shade of puce that almost clashed with her floral dress. "This is an outrage, a complete and utter fabrication. I'm calling the police. This is a clear circumvention of HOA Protocol Section 4, Article B, regarding frivolous emergency declarations." She actually fumbled in her oversized handbag and pulled out her phone, her thumb stabbing at the screen with righteous fury. "Good idea, Brenda," I said brightly. "They can help facilitate the emergency animal transfer. Maybe they have a tonnage expert on staff, or a specialist in vehicular SAS. Because I think your station wagon is giving off some serious negative vibes." Sarah sidled up to me, her eyes wide. "Are you completely insane?" she hissed under her breath, while simultaneously trying to prevent a curious beagle from investigating Brenda's clipboard too closely. "We're going to get arrested, or worse, a double HOA violation. Do you know what the fine is for improper use of a pseudo-emergency vehicle?" "Relax," I whispered back, trying to sound confident. I wasn't entirely sure Operation Fluffy Butt was going to work, but we were in it now. "What's the worst that can happen? She gives the artbulance a ticket for excessive charm and questionable roadworthiness?" The wail of an actual siren, far more impressive than the artbulance's wheezing moan, cut through the air. Brenda's call had been answered. 2 police cruisers, lights flashing with considerably more enthusiasm than mine, pulled up to the scene. One officer was young, with that fresh-out-of-the-academy look of someone who still believed he could make a difference. but was rapidly learning about the soul-crushing reality of suburban disputes. The other, Officer Miller, was older, with a neatly trimmed mustache that seemed to droop with the weight of 1,000 HOA squabbles. He got out of his car with a sigh that seemed to carry the collective weariness of law enforcement officers everywhere who've had to deal with one too many arguments about lawn gnomes. "All right, folks. What's the kerfuffle here?" Officer Miller said, his voice already tired. He glanced at Brenda. "Brenda, is this about the squirrels digging up your begonias again? Because we've been over this. That's really more of an animal control issue, or possibly a theological one if you believe they're tiny agents of chaos." Brenda drew herself up to her full 5'2" of indignation. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This person." She gestured dramatically at me, as if I were a particularly noxious weed that had sprouted on her pristine sidewalk, "is impersonating a veterinary professional, operating an unlicensed, dilapidated emergency vehicle, and attempting to liberate these animals, which are currently under strict HOA investigation for multiple procedural violations, including, but not limited to, failure to file an anticipated barking matrix." I offered Officer Miller my most harmless, helpful smile. "Officer, purely a misunderstanding, I assure you. We're just concerned citizens and highly qualified animal enthusiasts trying to ensure the safety and well-being of these adorable and possibly slightly dehydrated and existentially troubled rescue animals." I patted the side of the art ambulance, which responded with another loud, inexplicable clunk from its undercarriage, is a fully equipped veterinary transport vehicle, mostly. The pigeon in the glove compartment is an optional extra, of course. Officer Miller's gaze flickered from the art ambulance to my stained white coat, to Brenda's quivering clipboard, then to the array of hopeful, furry faces peeking out of the positive outcomes van. His face was a perfect mask of weary resignation. I suspected he'd seen it all. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Brenda, his tone carefully neutral, "is the rescue van illegally parked in a way that's obstructing traffic or posing an immediate safety hazard to other residents?" Brenda puffed up like an angry toad. "It's an unauthorized commercial entity on a designated residential thoroughfare during non-peak hours. It's aesthetically disruptive to the neighborhood's carefully curated visual harmony. And the driver, this Maria person, flat out refused to show me her vehicle's emissions report and its corresponding coefficient of atmospheric purity." Maria, who had been trying to calm a whimpering terrier, threw her hands up. "We're a non-profit organization trying to save animals. We run on donations and good intentions, not atmospheric purity coefficients." Officer Miller turned his tired gaze to Maria. "Ma'am, do you have permission from the homeowners, the Hendersons, I presume, to be on their property to pick up these animals?" "Yes, of course," Maria said. "They called us this morning. They surrendered a litter of adorable, entirely regulation-sized kittens." Brenda pounced. "Aha! The Hendersons!" As I was just explaining to this individual, another venomous glance my way, the Hendersons are currently under HOA review for unapproved wind chime sonority levels and failure to submit their quarterly petunia pigment analysis. Their testimony regarding adorable kittens is therefore suspect and inadmissible. The younger officer, who had been diligently taking notes, paused, his pen hovering over his pad. He looked up, a flicker of something, amusement, disbelief, in his eyes. He was now inspecting a particularly fluffy calico kitten that Sarah was holding, its tiny pink nose twitching. I saw him crack a tiny smile before quickly schooling his features back into an expression of professional neutrality. "Officer," I interjected, trying to steer the conversation back to something resembling sanity. "The real pressing issue here is the safe and humane transport of these animals. Brenda's vehicle, while I'm sure it meets all beige-related HOA color palette guidelines, is unfortunately obstructing a clear path for egress. If there were a real emergency, say if one of these kittens suddenly developed an allergy to bureaucratic red tape. Brenda's eyes flashed. This is a real emergency! An emergency of rules! An emergency of order! An emergency of properly filed forms in triplicate! She waved her clipboard so vigorously, a few sheets of paper fluttered off and landed near the Art Bulance's leaky tire. I had a sudden, terrible, and therefore irresistible idea. "You know, officer," I said, stroking my chin thoughtfully, "Brenda does have a point about the tonnage and the potential for asphalt integrity degradation. It's a serious concern. Perhaps we should call in some city contractors? Get a proper, independent assessment? I'm sure they could bring one of those very large, official-looking scales, and maybe some of those bright orange cone things for enhanced safety and visual demarcation." Brenda, to my utter astonishment, looked momentarily intrigued. The thought of more officialdom, more clipboards, more potential for measurements and violations clearly appealed to her on a deep spiritual level. Then, suspicion clouded her features again. She squinted at me. "Are you mocking the sanctity of municipal engineering standards, Michael?" Officer Miller sighed, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very depths of his weary soul. "Son," he said, looking directly at me, "please don't make me write reports that I don't want to write. My therapist says I need to reduce my exposure to convoluted paperwork. Brenda," he turned back to her, "they're trying to move some animals from point A to point B. Can we just let them move the animals?" Brenda clutched her clipboard to her chest like a shield. "Not until the numerous violations are formally addressed and the appropriate fines are levied and paid in full. I've already prepared the citations." She held up a pre-written ticket, filled out in her spiky, aggressive handwriting. "That'll be $50 for the unauthorized parking of a commercial vehicle, $75 for the potential biohazard and lack of manifest, $25 for excessive vehicle idling with an unconfirmed emissions profile, and," she paused for dramatic effect, "an additional $50 for general vehicular SAS and an uncooperative aura." "Vehicular SAS?" I repeated, dumbfounded. "Is that even a real infraction? Is there an appeals process for an uncooperative aura? Do I get character witnesses?" The Siamese cat in the van chose that moment to let out another ear-splitting yowl. This one so full of feline disdain it could have curdled milk at 50 paces. I think it was its official statement on the uncooperative aura charge. Okay, that was it. Diplomacy had failed. Reason had packed its bags and caught the first bus out of town. It was time for a little bit of controlled chaos. "Right!" I exclaimed, snapping my fingers with an air of sudden urgency. "Code red. No, wait. Code woof. Scratch that code, meow gensy. Officer, one of the animals appears to be going into acute existential crisis due to prolonged exposure to excessively detailed HOA regulations. We need to evacuate immediately. It's a textbook case of bylaw-induced anxiety." I turned to Sarah, my eyes wide with mock panic. "Quick! The emergency kit! The one with the therapeutic squeaky toys and the emergency supply of catnip." This kit was, in reality, a battered shoebox Uncle Leo kept in the Art Bulance, mostly filled with some grimy old bandages, a half-eaten dog biscuit, and a rubber chicken that had lost most of its squeak. I made a great show of rushing to the back of the Art Bulance, fumbling dramatically with the rusty latches on the rear doors. "We need sterile, fluff," I yelled over my shoulder. "And positive affirmations. Stat, someone get this kitten a tiny vision board." The absurdity of the situation was reaching a glorious, crescendoing peak. Officer Miller was visibly rubbing his temples, a pained expression on his face. The younger officer had retreated slightly and was now trying, with very little success, to stifle his laughter behind his hand, while pretending to examine a loose hubcap on his cruiser. Even Brenda seemed momentarily thrown off her game, her mouth agape, her clipboard lowering slightly, and then, as if on cue from some divine director of comedic timing, one of the larger dogs in the Positive Outcomes van decided to join the party. Gus, a friendly, goofy, 80-pound Labrador with a heart of gold and a brain full of happy thoughts and tennis balls. A dog I knew well from Sarah's many stories and occasional bring-him-home-for-the-weekend visits, got overexcited by all the commotion. In his enthusiasm, he managed to nudge open his crate door, which, in the earlier kerfuffle of Brenda's initial assault, hadn't been quite latched properly. With a joyful scrabble of claws on metal, Gus bounded out of the van. He was a furry missile of pure, unadulterated Labrador exuberance. He saw people. He saw sunshine. He saw Brenda's prize-winning, meticulously cultivated, soon-to-be Tri-County Bloom-Off finalist petunias in the Hendersons' adjacent flower bed. He clearly thought they looked like a fun new game, involving digging and possibly a celebratory roll. "Oh no," Sarah breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Brenda, however, shrieked. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horticultural horror, a sound that could shatter glass and scare pigeons for miles. "My petunias! My award-winning petal perfection petunias! That beast! That unregulated quadrupedal menace!" Gus, bless his innocent, happy-go-lucky heart, was having the absolute time of his life. He was joyfully, playfully, and with impressive efficiency, re-landscaping Brenda's petunia bed. Petals of purple, pink, and white flew through the air like botanical confetti. Dirt sprayed in ecstatic arcs. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated canine joy, and for Brenda, a vision of apocalyptic despair. In that instant, Brenda forgot about the unauthorized commercial van. She forgot about the questionable tonnage. She forgot about the artbulance and its flickering light. She even, I think, momentarily forgot about subsection 9, Article 4. All she saw was Gus, the furry agent of destruction, and her ruined, award-aspiring petunias. Her voice, when she finally found it, was no longer the strident squawk of an HOA enforcer. It was thin, reedy, and trembling. They were finalists in the Tri-County Bloom-Off. Mrs. Periwinkle from Hibiscus Heights will be insufferable now. And then, the truly unexpected twist happened. As Gus frolicked amongst the carnage, a happy, slobbery bark of pure delight escaped his furry muzzle. It was a big, booming, friendly bark. Brenda froze. Her eyes, which had been laser-focused on the Petunia massacre, darted to Gus. They went wide, not with anger this time, with something else, something I'd never seen on her face before. She took a tiny, hesitant step back, then another. Her voice, when she spoke again, was a small, shaky whisper, almost lost in the gentle summer breeze. "Big dog." Sarah, who had rushed forward to try and corral the exuberant Gus, stopped dead in her tracks. She looked from Gus to Brenda, then back to Gus. A look of dawning realization spread across her face. She turned to me, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Wait a minute," she mouthed silently, then whispered, Is she afraid of big dogs?" I stared. It couldn't be. Brenda, the scourge of whispering pines? The woman who faced down rogue garden gnomes and improperly parked minivans without flinching? Afraid of a happy-go-lucky lab? It was like discovering that Darth Vader was secretly terrified of kittens. "Holy moly," I breathed. The one chink in the armor of pure, unadulterated Karen-ness, the Achilles heel of the HOA. Gus, sensing a potential new friend, because he's a Labrador, and that's the Labrador Prime Directive, make all the friends, get all the pets, bounded happily towards Brenda, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. He had a mangled petunia stem dangling rakishly from the side of his mouth like a floral victory cigar. Brenda let out a small, terrified yelp and practically leaped behind the startled Officer Miller, using him as a human shield. "Get it away," she squeaked, her voice now several octaves higher than usual. "Get that wolf! Get that drooling harbinger of horticultural doom away from me!" Officer Miller, to his credit, maintained a semblance of professional composure, though his mustache was twitching suspiciously, and I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. He looked down at Gus, who was now sitting patiently, tail thumping the pavement, looking up at Brenda with an expression of hopeful, doggy confusion. "Brenda?" Officer Miller said, his voice laced with an almost heroic level of suppressed amusement. "It's just a friendly dog. A very enthusiastic dog. Ma'am," he said, turning to Maria, who was watching the entire scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. Perhaps now would be an opportune moment to secure your vehicle and depart while the, horticultural situation is being assessed." Maria didn't need to be told twice. She was already scrambling back into the driver's seat of the Positive Outcomes van, a grin threatening to split her face. Sarah, laughing, expertly scooped up the bewildered but still happy Gus, gave him a quick hug and bundled him back into the van, making absolutely sure his crate was securely latched this time. "Excellent work, team," I called out, giving a mock salute to the retreating van. "Emergency averted. The patients are stable-ish. And the petunias have achieved a new level of avant-garde deconstruction." The engine of the rescue van roared to life. With Brenda momentarily distracted by her newfound cynophobia and still attempting to hide her entire 5'2" frame behind the increasingly bemused Officer Miller, her beige station wagon of doom was no longer an effective barricade. Maria carefully, slowly, and with a triumphant glance in her rearview mirror, maneuvered the Positive Outcomes van past Brenda's car and onto the open road. Freedom. The sweet, sweet sight of that blue van shrinking in the distance was more satisfying than I could have imagined. "Thank you!" Maria shouted gleefully out the window as they pulled away. Sarah, from the passenger seat, beamed at me, her eyes sparkling. "You're a complete and utter lunatic," she called out, her voice full of laughter. "And I absolutely love you for it. Code Fluffybutt forever!" Brenda was still muttering about unruly canines, wanton destruction of prize-winning flora, and the inherent dangers of unregulated tail wagging. But her usual fire was significantly dampened. The sight of Gus, who was now looking a little sadly out the back window of the retreating van, seemed to have truly shaken her. The mighty Brenda, brought to heel by an 80-pound furball with a penchant for petunias. "Well, Officer Miller," I said, turning to him with my most innocent, helpful citizen smile. I casually took off the slightly too large white coat. "Looks like our work here is done. Just another day saving lives. And possibly some prize-winning petunias from further enthusiastic admiration and impromptu redesign." Officer Miller just shook his head, a small, weary smile finally breaking through his professional facade. He looked at the Art-Bulance, then at me, then at the rapidly disappearing rescue van. "Just try to keep the Art-Bulance for actual art, son," he said, his voice dry. "Or at least get that other flashing light fixed. And maybe invest in some air freshener. My paperwork, and possibly the local pigeon population, thanks you in advance." He tipped his hat, then gently began to herd a still flustered and muttering Brenda towards her house, probably to begin the long and arduous process of documenting the Great Petunia Incident of '25 for the HOA archives. I watched them go. The neighborhood was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a battle unexpectedly won, a small, absurd victory for common sense, furry friends, and the strategic deployment of ridiculousness everywhere. I climbed back into the art Bulance. It smelled a little less like antiseptic and old hay now, and a little more like triumph. As I rumbled it slowly back to its designated parking spot in my driveway, careful not to exceed any imaginary tonnage limits, I saw Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street. She was pretending to water her already immaculate lawn. She caught my eye, a huge grin spreading across her face. She gave me another, even bigger thumbs up, and then a slow, deliberate, and entirely complicit wink. Later that evening, Sarah and I were collapsed on the couch, recovering from the day's adventures. The animals, we'd heard from Maria, were all safe, sound, and happily settling in at the Positive Outcomes shelter, blissfully unaware of the suburban psychodrama they had narrowly escaped. "You know," Sarah said, snuggling closer, a purring calico kitten, one of the Henderson rescues that Maria had insisted Sarah foster for the night, as a thank you, curled up on her lap. Brenda actually filed a formal complaint against Gus for infliction of emotional distress upon a dedicated HOA official and first-degree horticultural terrorism. I snorted. Of course she did. Does the HOA manual have a subsection for that? Perhaps under canine-induced carnage of cultivated chrysanthemums? Probably, Sarah giggled. But guess what? The Hendersons, apparently emboldened by the whole Petunia incident and Gus's accidental heroism, are officially challenging the wind chime sonority violation. They're citing artistic expression and the inherent right to ambient melodic soundscapes. And Mr. Henderson, she paused, her eyes twinkling, is seriously talking about getting a Great Dane. A slow grin spread across my face. The revolution has begun, I said, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. All thanks to a few resourceful rescue animals, a very good boy named Gus with an impeccable taste in flowers, and one slightly dilapidated, utterly ridiculous, and heroically stinky vet ambulance. And as for Brenda? Well, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, which in Whispering Pines operates with the speed and efficiency of a Cold War spy network, that she's now petitioning the HOA board for stricter leash laws, mandatory muzzles for any dog over 15 pounds, and the immediate installation of reinforced steel-plated flower beds around her property. Some things, I guess, never change. But for one glorious, chaotic, petunia-strewn Saturday, we stared into the abyss of HOA tyranny, and the abyss blinked. And then it got thoroughly intimidated by a happy, slobbery Labrador. And that, my friends, is what I call a truly positive outcome. The Art Bulance might be retired from active duty for now, but I'm keeping the keys handy. You just never know when the next code Fluffybutt might strike.